The four guys that are not in the group. Yeah. But all right. Thanks, Eric.
Awesome. Cool. All right. My name's Eric Katz. Yeah, most of you know me. I'm a consultant here, working for Highlights for Children. This is my presentation on SVG animation. Title is called an advanced degree in SVG, so very creative. Hopefully, this will help give you inspiration going forward and kind of breathing life into your assets, your documents, anything you're creating for the web, even mobile, dev, iOS, Android, that kind of environment too. So yeah, hopefully you'll be able to take an opportunity that you have. Maybe it's not something that was directly given to you as like, this needs to be an animated asset or this document needs to animate, but you found the opportunity and said, hey, this would be an awesome place to kind of throw animation in subtly. I'll give you a few different ways to animate your SVGs, help you, guide you, pick the best method for your needs. But in the end, this is something I kind of want to advocate now at the beginning before you get all crazy into it. You know, SVG animation is so awesome, I'm going to throw it everywhere. Less is more, and you don't want to distract from the purpose of whatever the document is that has that SVG. You want to be subtle, and you don't want to overdo it. So, yeah. So to do a quick recap here, we can talk about the basic pieces of an SVG. The cool part about SVG that you probably know is that, or maybe you don't, is that the graphics that you're looking at in an SVG is like actual data that you can parse and dissect. So let me open the link in a new tab, maybe. Open link in a new window. There we go. Okay. So here we kind of have like a quick review of what kind of shapes and elements you'd find in an SVG document. It's an XML document. The base tag is going to be SVG, and then you'll be able to find shapes like a rectangle, which is this big purple blob right here. If I turn this off, it disappears, right? You can have line elements. Oops.
Do you mind making your cancel over there?
Yeah. There we go. You can have line elements. You can have, just uncomment all of this, circles, ellipses, generic path, a polyline, polygon, etc. We can kind of go through and see which ones each of these are. The rectangle is this purple background. You can get rid of that, and that'll disappear. The line is not showing up for some reason. Just get rid of that. Circle has some basic properties, like the center X radius, the center X coordinate, the center Y coordinate, the radius of that circle. You can add additional parameters like the stroke width, the fill of that circle. These are kind of generic properties that you'll see most shapes or SVG elements can carry. Ellipses have, similar to a circle, they have an X and Y coordinate, but they also have a second X and Y coordinate to kind of make that ellipse. Path is basically a set of commands that will tell it to, let's see, the path is this blob right here. I can just make it opacity like that. We can see that's the path. And essentially, it'll be a long string of M commands, L commands, C commands. And essentially just saying, move a point to here. And so I changed it. So the first point is going to be somewhere else. You can see the shape changed. and then draw a line to here, and it'll draw a line and the shape changes again. So you can kind of really see that the graphic that you're looking at, regardless of how complex it is going to be comprised of these types of elements, these types of shapes. So you could always go in and make these kind of changes and manipulate the graphic, which is what makes it really unique and awesome. So that's a recap of SVG shapes. Yeah, so those are kind of the building blocks. Another really awesome demonstration to help you get a grasp of the SVG document is this code pen by Anna Tudor. And essentially, it's a really great illustration as far as describing how the SVG view box works, where you have four parameters, where the first one is the X value, the Y value, and then the last two parameters are the width and height. So if you think about it, an SVG is basically an infinite document, right? An infinite canvas that you're kind of pinpointing in a certain area. So if this was a graphic that was, if this SVG document was a lot bigger, but I only wanted to display a specific portion of that document, I could still load in the whole document and then just navigate to that kind of coordinate system and specify the width and height, and I can get the display that I want. So it's pretty cool. And then this kind of gives you an idea of how the point system kind of works here. This is a polygon shape, so it just needs X, Y coordinates, and then it'll keep going. So hopefully that kind of gives you a better idea of the landscape for a SVG document. So why do I keep harping on SVGs recently? I think it's definitely important, especially as our devices and dimensions kind of expand, right? And our target audiences kind of morph and change. The thing about SVGs that are really nice is that regardless of the device or the viewport of that document, they're going to get a consistent view of that asset, right? It doesn't matter if it's an Apple Watch, it doesn't matter if it's an iPhone 6 Plus, or if it's an old iPhone 3. The graphic will scale and fit appropriately along those devices. So, you know, even desktops, we're getting resolutions like 5K for the new iMac displays. 4K TVs are probably the newest trend coming out going forward. So the better we implement our assets to scale, the easier it'll be for us going forward. We won't have to maintain asset like file types, file sizes for different devices anymore. So that's why I think SVG is really important. And let's talk about animations. So SVG animations really come in three flavors. There's CSS animations, SMIL animations, and JavaScript. So we can go over CSS animations a little bit. A lot of you are front-end devs. Maybe some of you aren't really full-time front-end, but for the most part, I think a lot of people here have dabbled in front-end. And CSS isn't really the easiest of languages to deal with, right? So I love that GIF. But basically, here's a kind of breakdown of how you can implement CSS animations through SVGs. Because you can also, the thing about SVGs that make them great is that they can be implemented in a lot of different ways. You can put them directly in your HTML document. You can source them like an image source. You can embed them through the HTML embed or object, even iframe them in. And then you can have fallback for devices that don't support it. So for IE 8 and below, I guess, you can kind of easily use some of these strategies for it. CSS animations should work for all of these, except for the fact that CSS transitions aren't supported in IE 9, and transforms aren't supported in IE at all yet. And there's a few limitations on the CSS animation spec that you don't that are implied based on the spec that aren't limitations in the other two flavors. So as of right now, we don't have a way to animate on like a path or anything like that. But coming soon in a browser prefixed version near you, probably, we'll have a motion CSS attribute. In here, we'll be able to like specify a URL to a file that we want it to attach to. So it could be an external SVG path, clip path type of formatting. Yeah, so that's pretty awesome. So eventually the power of animation through CSS is going to go up.
SVG itself is really backward compatible, right? I mean, it's an old technology, right?
Yeah, definitely. SVG's been out since 1998, I think. I think that's right. Maybe 2001. I think 1998 is when the spec was first released. Right, and so they were really awesome. The idea was that, okay, here, we have these scalable vector graphics we can do. IE ended up kind of implementing their own version of SVG. I think it's VSF format, I think is what it was. But the basic limited support for SVG is really good. Going back to IE8, for IE8 you can do that the VSF type of fallback. There's a lot of JavaScript libraries that can handle like a polyfill for SVG. But it also does come hand in hand with this. This is the second flavor of animation style. This is a smile, I think is how it's pronounced, but I call it SMIL because there's no E. And it's synchronized multimedia integration language. This has its own working group for the W3 consortium. It's not supported in IE. It's probably not going to be supported in IE even going forward. And Blink deprecated it. So I'm not going to really talk too much about it. Some of the cool features about SMIL animations is that it's very declarative. It's in a similar XML format that SVG is in. And it lets you do a lot. It lets you do some things that you can't do very easily in JavaScript or at all in CSS. Like this example here by the user Noah Blon, and he is doing a path transformation. Sorry. We can load it up real quick and we'll take a look. As you can see, there's no JavaScript happening at all. Right? This is completely within the Svg document. And this is the animate SMIL element. And here are the attributes for it. It has a name. You give it a duration. And then it has key times for, it's basically the equivalent of like in CSS animations, there are keyframes. Key times are basically the same thing. So from 0 to 1, these are the key times where we want something to happen. Calc mode has spline and then a few other, I think maybe one other setting actually. And then the key splines are the paths that we want to kind of alter at each of those times, right? So know the values of those paths too. These are, oh, sorry, key splines are the Bezier curve of that animation. Sorry. So that's SMILs. They're awesome. You can put them in line like that, and then you can have it go through, and it works really great. Only thing is that, like I said, there's no IE support. So you can polyfill them with a library called Fake Smile. I haven't used it. But really, for the most part, I prefer using JavaScript or CSS. You know
why it's being deprecated?
I think it's in part being deprecated because the CSS animation spec is getting more powerful. It's already more intuitive for the front end guys that are using it. And for anything that dives into the realm of complexity that Smile is supposed to take care of, JavaScript is already kind of the front runner for that arena.
So currently, can you import another SVG into that?
Can you morph this SVG into another one?
No, have another import like an external SVG and then use the animation keyframes or the animation setup they have in SMIL or Smile.
So you can embed an SVG with Smile in it, and it will animate. Is that what you're
I'm
asking?
just wondering, like, those individual like objects, like that square, circle, whatever, triangle.
Mhm.
They always have to animate, and they can't exist on their own, currently.
Right, but you can technically pull them out. If we go back to the code real quick, you'll see really the difference here is these values.
Yeah.
And if I pulled these out, each of these represents basically, excuse me, I think it's the shape. So I'm trying to think if I just like, if I delete this, I don't know.
That's definitely the circle.
Yeah, it's not the circle. Actually, maybe it is. No, I don't know. Yeah, so these are the colors. The colors are animating at the same time here.
But there's really no reuse from this. Like, it's a single use animation.
You can take the paths from these and create, like if I grab this path and created a new document and created like a polygon shape or a path, this would be a path specifically. I could use that shape as long as the coordinates within this path are in my view box and viewport of that SVG, if that makes sense. So basically, as long as, looks like this document is no bigger than 100 by 100 grid. So if we'll just do it. I'll copy this path. Maybe. There we go. Create a new code pen. There you go. So it already showed up. So basically that first path is a square. And if I copy the other paths, you'd see that there would then be the circle and then triangle. And then I don't remember if there's a fourth shape or not, but they are reusable in that sense. But obviously it's like how you view this path depends on the viewport of the view box of your SVG. So like right now the paths are all specifically tied to this grid system, but if I move my view box completely outside of that coordinate system, you won't see a shape at all. Or if only part of the, if I cut this square in half. So right now the view box is, oh god, it's 0, 0, maybe 100, 100. There you go. Okay, so that's the main view box. And then if I change the coordinates on this to -50, -50, you can see that I'm only seeing a very small portion of that shape now. So I'm really only seeing that top left coordinate of that shape because we moved the whole coordinate system over, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, because I know you talked about that earlier, is that like the best way to like crop or
So
an SVG? Or
yeah, and we'll talk about a little bit later about when you get a document, you don't really have like as a developer, you're not always going to be the person handling these assets. You just kind of get something shipped to you. You get an Illustrator file, you get a sketch file, and it's your job to figure out what to do with that file and how to implement it. So depending on where these shapes are made in those documents, they might not line up directly in the 0, 0 corner of your coordinate system.
Yeah.
So you might have to actually relocate your coordinate system to get the SVG to display properly. So yeah, so that's the SMIL language. It's pretty cool. Hopefully, when we say it's deprecated, I'll go back to that real quick. It's probably going to still be available until there are adequate solution environments in CSS that kind of handle the things that SMIL no longer handles. You know, so just because it's deprecated in Blink just means that they're not going to implement anything new that comes along with SMIL. Internet Explorer for sure isn't implementing anything new going forward. I think their stance is definitely that it could either be done in JavaScript or CSS going forward. So, yeah.
What is Blink?
Blink is Blink is a fork of the WebKit browser engine.
So is Chrome moving away from WebKit?
So Chrome has kind of forked off of WebKit to work on Blink.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
What did that
Chrome 20.
yeah.
happen? Really?
For a long time, they were working in parallel. So like the Google Chrome team was kind of pushing WebKit forward. And then I think they had some conflicts where they wanted to move ahead faster in some certain aspects.
So
So
they actually fork WebKit nightly, and so it's not even like the official like release of it, so it takes it from WebKit.
So like for a vendor prefix tag like in Chrome.
uses WebKit still.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's maybe
But
why.
they've also deprecated a lot of the prefixes. And so did Safari as well as.
This is what happens when you do SharePoint development. You just like
Yeah. Yeah, if anyone watched the latest WWDC, they talked about the latest Safari, and that version actually ships with Flexbox completely done without vendor prefixes anymore. So
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
so things are definitely moving forward. Fasted.
You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Okay, so now this is where the meat and potatoes is of this talk.
Yeah.
This is the JavaScript section. I'm going to talk mostly on Snap and Greenstock. And basically, Snap is a really good manipulation library for SVG. Greenstock is more of a general animation library, but it works really well with SVG, so I like using it too. Yeah, so we can talk about it. So a lot of times you'll have something shipped to you that's a designed animation, right? Like in this case, if you saw the effect, these cogs are spinning, and that the designer had this animation in mind. So, they sent you a GIF or something, and you're like, here, implement this design. But with the issues of the modern web, where we have resolutions getting super big and super small, retina displays, different varying pixel densities, this kind of solution to this problem kind of sucks, right? It's this animated GIF, right? You might think, why not just use this GIF? No, please don't do that. It doesn't scale nicely, even if you save the GIF at like a monstrous size, right? 900. This GIF on the screen is 900 by 900, so it looks pretty sweet. But it's 942 kilobytes, right? So performance-wise, it's probably not an asset you want to be loading on a page with other similar sized assets for a unique designed experience. This one's also really big because it's a transparent GIF too. So, it doesn't matter what the background is. Oh, sorry, Wednesday, okay. Doesn't matter what the background is, this GIF will work, right? So it's a workable solution, and it's something that a lot of designers can ship to you, but it's probably not ideal for performance, and it's not ideal from a usability and accessibility issue, right? Like none of the content in this GIF is really accessible to anyone other than the person who downloads it and actually views it, right? So here's the same GIF on the left, and on the right is an SVG version animated with Snap SVG. So we can zoom in, and we can see that we can get as big as we want. I'm going to open it up in a new tab. Sorry, it's just so you can see. Open link in new window. Okay. But we can see that it's like crisp and clear. The animation's very smooth. And really the amount of work involved is there's a lot of stuff you can do performance-wise to clean up an Svg document. If you look into it, there's a lot of things that get added. Illustrator adds their own like metadata that gets plugged in there. IDs get added wherever a designer has added layer names. This layers obviously called something ridiculous. And the document's pretty big, right? Here's all the shapes we're talking about. There's additional properties that I didn't mention, but you can kind of figure out as you reference them. I did not type this by hand. This is an asset I got to me that was delivered to me in an Illustrator file. And you can just export as an SVG, and a lot of it just comes like this, right? There's a lot of cleanup that can go optimization into this SVG file, but for this example and the point I'm trying to illustrate, it's not that important for me to show you. Like even without any optimization at all, this is going to be significantly more lightweight and better for our users and anyone visiting the site. So, for CSS, I'm just applying some boilerplate to make the SVG maximum of 400 width. So I could probably take that off to get 100%.
The default range is for the display.
100%. Oh, for the display, I think it's inline or inline block maybe. I'm not sure. We can find out real quick. I know there's an issue where even if you load an SVG element into a document, but it doesn't have anything in it, it's going to take up space in the document. So we jump in here. Yeah, but there's definitely.
What?
It wasn't computed.
It's not.
Inline, okay. So it defaults to inline, and even if it's empty,
That's super strange.
yeah, there are some weird quirks that you can come across, but for the most part, anything you run into, you should be able to find pretty quickly when you search it. But the JavaScript for animating this is only 31 lines. Yeah, so basically I'm just using snap library to select that SVG by the selector, right? The ID SVG. The other cool part about this is now I have control of that animation completely. If some instances or some resolutions, I don't want the gear to spin so quickly, so it's more noticeable for like maybe a smaller resolution, I can have JavaScript change the gear spin time so that it's 6,000 seconds instead of 3,500 seconds. So now it spins a lot slower. If I want to change the speed of the big gear as opposed to the little gear, if it's not lining up correctly, now I have the flexibility of changing that programmatically instead of having to go back to a designer and say, like, recreate this GIF for me, and then waiting that back and forth time of like getting something tweaked the way it needs to be done. No longer have that. So yeah, I'll have this demo available. You can play around with it. So since the other thing I didn't mention before is that you can apply IDs or classes to whatever paths you want. This G path is just a group element. So it's kind of just like it's like an empty div in that sense that you can apply some styling to it. But for the most part, you can just use it to like group paths and shapes together. So that like if a bunch of shapes, like if this cog was a circle and these teeth on that cog were a separate shape, then I could just make one group that made this cog one shape together for me to select and manipulate. So yeah, we can close this a little bit. 31 lines gets it to animate. And if we look at it, 10 of those lines are just like boilerplate configuration. This function here is all it is that's running that animation. So pretty cool. Pretty cool. And like I said, so that GIF on the left has a performance hit of 940 kilobytes, while the SVG is only 29. And that's with JavaScript, markup in your document, etc. So same here. We have a GIF on the left, an animation on the right. The animation is not exactly the same, but the gist of what the animation is trying to portray is pretty good, I think. Maybe you don't like it. We can
Build that one too.
Yeah, built it too. You can. So you can inline JavaScript in your SVG file in your document along with CSS styling. The only thing is you want to wrap it in C data because it's not going to be XML syntax. It's going to break some XML parsing. But you can do that, and you can even embed those SVG as images in like an image tag, and it'll still run the content in them for everything except for IE in certain instances. So like some of the animation properties and stuff like that, like a lot of animations you can do, like you can do CSS transforms and things like that in Chrome, Safari, Firefox, but in Opera and IE, you can't do those things yet. So yeah.
So did you build this one from scratch, or
Yeah.
this?
Built this one too.
The last one was from Illustrator, you said, right?
Yeah, this is also from Illustrator. So, but the GIF on the left here is 560 kilobytes. The SVG on the right is 14 kilobytes. Right. So, yeah. So there's a lot of benefits there. Here are two animations. Sorry, I'll open this up in a new tab so you can see it.
Really into tax education.
Yeah, this is for a project I did a couple months ago before I was at Cardinal. So yeah, it was relevant for this topic. So there's the animation. You can tweak that, the bounce curve, the Bezier curve, the animation curve, sorry. Tweak the timing. But really this whole animation was done 62 lines. The SVG is only 121 lines. And I only have this CSS block, which is nothing, right? And on here, the GIF is 799 kilobytes, and the SVG is 12, right? Because the GIF is designed for, like, if I open this image in a new tab, it's huge because they want it to display nicely for Retina displays and mobile. But it kind of defeats the whole purpose when your mobile visitor is using up their monthly quota and bandwidth to download that graphic. So, yeah.
Of the past three animations, which one was like the most complicated? The gears, the triangles.
The triangles was the most complicated, and that's probably the one that I missed the mark on the most as far as direct alignment with the GIF. If you look at it, like, there's slight timing differences, but also I took an opinionated route for that timing because I thought the GIF timing was wrong anyway for the animation they're trying to convey. So
if you're like a godfather of SVG like you, how long does something like that take?
a couple hours for each one. So there's definitely a time sink for getting this stuff done, but doing it right definitely yields easier maintainability going forward and a lot more flexibility. Right? In any of those instances, if the animation needs to be tweaked or if, like, shapes need to be removed, it's not that big of a hassle at that point anymore. Right? If it's drastically changed, then you have to start over. But for the most part, it gives you the strength to do that. So here's the other side of the coin. Yeah, go ahead.
Raising your hand, what was that?
Yeah. Flailing.
Yeah, I'm having difficulty understanding why we need JavaScript for some of the animation. Can't you do it in SVG as well?
Right, and that's the SMIL, animation functions. That's what I said. You can definitely do stuff with that, but it's not supported in IE, and it's deprecated in Chrome.
Gotcha.
So I think moving forward, a lot of the implementation advantages that has, as far as, like, things that you can't animate in CSS yet, like, I think gradients off the top of my head isn't something that you can animate in CSS, but in a SMIL animation function you can. Or the other example was the animation pathing. If I have, like, an SVG path, I can just say, okay, run an animation along this path. Make something move along this path. As a SMIL function, I can do that very easily. In JavaScript, it's a little bit more work. With these libraries, it makes it a lot easier. And with CSS, it's not possible, really, unless you keyframe every movement. And depending on how complex the path is, it's probably not the best solution.
Another question related to JavaScript.
Yeah.
Hold on to the end.
No, it can
So
ask.
when it comes to, like, actually looking at the animation in JavaScript, like, for your SVG, so it's like a static, like, graphic as a whole.
Yeah.
How are you debugging and, like, actually targeting animation that you're doing?
So
Like,
right. So
individual paths inside there.
yeah. So this was one of the issues that kind of got brought up earlier at Code, like earlier prior to the presentation, was the tooling for this type of implementation stuff. Right now, I think the best tooling there is are these JavaScript libraries. And there's documentation to help you figure out a lot of stuff. But for the most part, I find myself playing in DevTools and Chrome. You could do the same in Firebug and Firefox. Internet Explorer, I'm sure, has their own DevTools as well. But really, it's like, and this is where I want to bring in this kind of ties into this portion right here, which is the improvisation portion, where a designer will come up with something that looks sweet. Like this is an actual document, highlights just released for trying to help recruit front-end web developers for their team. And I think it's pretty awesome. Like the designer that worked on this really caught, like if you want to know what it's like working there, this kind of encompasses the environment, the people that work there, their likes, their habits, things like that. So this is a pretty awesome graphic, but it kind of misses the mark as far as like conveying any real point, because it's just like a static, it's something that you would find as like an ad in like a magazine or something. It's like good as just like an ad, but not really, it doesn't really fit the target audience. So like I thought, well, wouldn't this be awesome if you kind of splice some of these things up? And here's the full sketch document. Sorry, getting some Inception, yeah. Oh, I don't have it open recent. Cool. I'll go back to that anyway. But essentially, I have like a whole sketch document of all of these items on the screen, right? And so I thought, okay, let's just start grabbing pieces of them and play with them, right? So I started using green sock animation. So I was like, okay, let's do something like this for maybe each of those little circular orbs, right? I wanted to try something simple. So for this, I just created this animation where the light bulb comes in, the border is dashed, it spins around, fills up, yada, yada, right? Pretty cool. The cool thing about this is that it scales. You can kind of embed this wherever you want to now. If you wanted to like create like a bigger interface for this type of asset, that'd be great. Likewise, here's a different one, right? And this one I also added that it follows your mouse so that, you know, it can do whatever you want. And the code for this is all not very crazy. It's like, I want to say that a lot of these frameworks can be kind of scary at first glance, but once you start diving in and playing with them, it's not very difficult. Green sock animation, P stands for something plugin, was originally something that was developed for Flash, implemented into JavaScript now that Flash has kind of died a little bit. So it's pretty awesome. It's a licensed product, so you have to pay for usage. So if you did want to use this anywhere in production, you have to pay license costs for it. I think it's like relatively inexpensive for the amount of benefits you get from it. But here I just have some basic CSS. Well, I guess I'm adding box shadow and stuff. This is mostly because the added like containers and stuff for this, right? So I have some boilerplate CSS for these things. But if we look at the actual JavaScript, this is done in 37 lines. Excuse me. I've been kind of overcoming a cold or something. I don't know, just a cough, I guess. And this is just green sock, no jQuery, anything like that. Don't really need any other dependencies. And I'm just doing a document query selector, this bulb ID, which if I pull up in here, this is going to look crazy, but is this. Yeah, this path right here is the bulb. Maybe actually I'm going to pop out of this presentation mode now. Maybe press shortcuts everywhere. Window. Sorry, view, exit, full screen. Cool. Cool. Ignore these. It's not for me. It's HTTPS stuff, right? Those are my bugs. But basically, this is like my process for manipulating and handling it. So if I see a path or a shape that I want to do some sort of animation with, I'll kind of find it in DevTools because it's pretty easy. It does this little highlighting thing that's awesome. And then you can just go in and give it an ID, something that you can use as a personal identifier to identify that path and then use in JavaScript or CSS or whatever the case may be. So here I said, okay, I want this path. And I'm going to call it a bulb because I want to start doing stuff to it. Yeah, GreenSock has this timeline light and timeline max function. You can just create a timeline, give it some options. If I want this to just repeat over and over again, I can do like -1, and this will go back and forth. I want to yo-yo. If I wanted to like do the animation, it'll run this animation, and then like start over again. Doesn't work for this case because I have something that on complete is supposed to chain additional animation. So I'm going to turn yo-yo off. But essentially, you know, I have it doing this, and this first timeline, all it does is go in and turn repeat off. All it does is go in and say, okay, take that bulb. I want this to start from 0 seconds on the timeline. I want it to set the opacity to 0, and I want it to translate that bulb to -25 pixels above the sphere. So it's going, so the bulb originally starts in the middle of the Svg document. I translate it so that it's at the top. And then when the animation runs at 1 second, I want it to, so then you kind of chain these timeline functions so that we start at 0, it starts at that opacity 0, translates the item, and then from 0 to 1, for this 1 second duration, I want to set the opacity to 1, and I want to translate back in. So if we refresh this, you kind of see that first chain where the bulb comes in. And then on complete, I have it just do this fill bulb function where I've created another timeline where it's kind of throws in these rectangles from the side, which are ovals, I guess, but the shape itself is actually a rectangle. And then afterwards, it, you know, moves the border dash around, fills the bulb, and then shows the exclamation and starts pulsing the bulb a little bit.
Just me, or does that light bulb not look centered?
Yeah, it might not be.
Okay.
That's
It's just really bothering me. I can't tell if it's where I'm sitting or.
yeah. That could be by design. That's not my fault.
Yeah.
Um,
Manufacturing defect.
yeah.
This is a feature.
Yeah, these were actually designed by Lance King at Highlights. So
Passive lens.
yeah, it's his fault.
So, Mark, I think this ties into your question. I don't know how accurate this is, but animations in JavaScript are kind of nice if you need a callback. So so I think you're using like on complete.
Yeah, that's a
So
callback.
animations is like kind of nice things. Like I want to animate and then go whatever.
Yeah, and Snap works best if you're doing like a timeline effect in Snap. It also works in the same way where you run some sort of animation and then you'll call back to the next animation. And then if that has another animation, you'd call back to that. So it's very procedural animation, I guess. And then my presentation died somewhere, but let me just get to the last section.
I ran into a problem where I was showing and hiding stuff
Mhm.
with CSS transitions.
Mhm.
And I ran into a problem when you change it to do cascading drop downs. So if I needed to then like show and hide stuff based on things, I couldn't, or at least I couldn't figure out a way how to do it with CSS because I need to have some kind of dependency between animations. So then I just moved things from CSS to JavaScript.
Yeah, you can do it in CSS with keyframes sometimes. So that's basically the same thing, except it's keyframes are difficult because it's percentage based off of duration as opposed to callbacks where you can do them percentage based off duration as well, like for the timeline and the GreenSock library and for Snap SVG, but those essentially are setting times for each event and each occurrence as they're happening. Whereas in an animation that's like one long string of animations, you literally have to go percentage based, and then CSS has an animation delay property and an animation timing or an animation length property, which will take seconds or milliseconds. But if you're doing anything like a loading graphic and you're doing like some sort of staggered effect where like circles are like flying around the screen in like 1, 2, 3, like I don't know what the Windows loader looks like now or anything like that, but anything like that can be more difficult in CSS because you're working off of percentages of the total animation as opposed to actual timing of each individual frame that you're adjusting. So last few improvisation things. Here's the cardinal logo. Here's the logo getting traced. It's hard to see. The stroke is really thin. And then filled in and what's it called. And the cool thing about this is I talked about a little bit about browser compatibility and some of the issues between the different animation methodologies, right? The SMIL, CSS, and JavaScript. And the cool thing is you can kind of combine these as you need for different things, right? If one animation is sincerely just like a nicety and it doesn't really matter that it's in one browser and not another browser, then you can still implement it. And whatever browser has it, and whatever doesn't. So it's not like you need to only do JavaScript stuff. If you're just simply applying CSS stuff because that's what you're comfortable with, feel free to do it. It's definitely really easy to do and a good intro for manipulating SVG paths and shapes without having to get too involved with JavaScript. Here's I don't know, I think Ollie used this for his Angular SharePoint thing that he was doing a long time ago. But it's just an SVG that I think Ryan Stryker made for him. And what's that?
I was giving a shout out to SharePoint.
Yeah, SharePoint.
Rewrite SharePoint.
Why are you not working?
It's a Microsoft project. I know. Actually, should.
Yeah, I don't know why this isn't working right now. I think it's something to do with this error. Yeah. In CodePen, sure.
Did you sell this back to Cardinal?
Yeah.
He actually made this before we started.
Oh, so you brought this to the interview.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Impressed me. Oh.
Yeah. Okay.
There you go. So that's a little bit easier to see, right? But boom. But this uses, I think this uses some CSS for the text section. That's the other thing is there's also a text element in SVG. So the people, ideas, solutions part of that are definitely human readable, machine readable, robot readable. So the what? Yeah, so that's another JavaScript library that I was playing with for that demo, but you don't have to use it for that specific implementation. So that's all I have for this. That went a lot longer than I thought it would, but yeah. So. Yeah, any questions about anything?
Yeah, when you talked about it, I forget which one, I think it was triangle or one of those,
Mhm.
you said it took like a couple hours. Is most of that work the Illustrator, getting shapes? Yeah,
No.
most of the work is the animation.
The animation, yeah.
Tracing.
Yeah, and in those cases, I was getting a lot of like, so when you export an SVG, in those cases, I was actually getting SVG exports from Illustrator instead of the Illustrator files themselves. And so they were exporting it with a bunch of hidden layers that were getting loaded into the SVG document. So the SVG files were actually like 3 times as big when they sent them to me because they had like all these different like version 1, version 2, version 3 in this document, and they had them exported along with the actual pieces I needed. So I had to go in and clean up the document before I could manipulate the things I wanted to. And even then it was like each of those triangles in that pyramid was like, I think there was 9 triangles or something like that, or 6, but each of them was their own shape and they had their own kind of tween. So it required a lot more finite implementing, I guess. So it is one of those, like, depends how complicated something is to like weigh the benefits there. But I thought it turned out pretty good. So there's a few other SVGs for that project that I also did, but didn't want to show you all of them. So cool.
So all the numbers that are, we see in all those pretty much they mostly come from like an Illustrator. Save as SVG.
Yes, most of them that are like, so like the other
Static shapes.
thing that I didn't talk about, which is D3.js, which is data-driven JavaScript, and it's something that I wanted to like kind of like duo with Dove about, but it's kind of like one of the next things I really want to get into because it's very meta if you think about it. And so D3.js is it's kind of like a data visualization library. And so like if you have graphs or like pie charts, things like that, it'll generate those visualizations from with JavaScript using data. And the way that it does that is using SVG. And so in those cases, those graphs and charts are never actually in Illustrator, right? But the library itself is generating those visualizations. And so I think that gets really cool because if you think about SVGs as being this transparent medium between design and like data, and then you see that it's being implemented to visualize data, it's very meta, where you can like, because you can go into any of those visualizations. Oh, there's my slider. Okay, cool. You can go into any of those, d3js.org, right? They have a bunch of demos on their site. And now that you've kind of gotten the a breakdown of how an SVG is generated, like what parts make up an SVG. God, okay, view. Okay, so you can't really see what I'm selecting. Maybe if I get out of the presentation mode. Cool. View, exit presentation mode. Yes. Okay, so here we have DevTools. Here we have this visualization done in D3. And here we can see that this right here is a rectangle. Oops. And it's actually two rectangles, right? There's a pink rectangle and a purple rectangle. But like the shape that makes the rectangle is right there. Like you can change the numbers right here if you wanted to. Like it's not, oops. There's no, like if I wanted to like move this over to maybe the 0 coordinate, where'd it go? Now it's moved over. Do you see how it kind of shifted? I didn't see what the, that's how you do it. That's it.
What would you like the statistics to say?
This is how they do it in politics. But yeah, and this is another awesome library. If you look at this, like the actual code to generate this is really not that much. I don't know what this is. Like from here to, okay, this is a lot, but a lot of their demos aren't really that complicated. And it like looks amazing and you're like, how did they do this? And then when you look at the actual source code for it, you're like, oh, it's 50 lines. They're using like the basic pie chart example mode for that library. So it's definitely something that I think moving forward, we'll see a lot more of in front end, especially as device mediums become more and more less specific, or, you know. I think that there's definitely all sorts of reasons why you should try to take some time and play with this stuff. So here's the actual GIF.
What resources do you recommend for learning?
Year, I think there's been significant movement as far as what you can do. I didn't even bring up filtering in SVG. Which can be applied to any sort of animation in CSS. You can use an SVG filter to
augment regular animation in CSS without having it like a copy. It could just be something that does something like make something really scale. And all of a sudden, that's a poor example because that's already something that's been discussed specifically, like based on CPU and things like that. But like, if you want to, yeah, it's very, there's a lot of things that interact with a lot of different forms as far as HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So with this, I can end this presentation. I have links to different people's profiles, which would be, I recommend as like one of the best ways to learn. And all those people on Twitter, all those people about stuff, magazine, articles, workshops, articles, that come out, stuff, and they're using SVG, Elastic, things like that. Yeah, there's a SVG and podcast which came out the last 2 months, I want to say, and he basically the guy who's I forget his name, I forget his name, but whoever he is, he's pretty good. He has very access to interviews different people in the field. The creator of Snap SVG, which we're building now, also created an IE8 or IE6 and above all the library called .NET. And so Snap SVG is the successor to that library. So it's not there. You know, his name is Nikolai something. I don't know, he's an amazing project. You can follow him on Twitter. The podcasts are great because he kind of takes it an episode early, like 15 to 20 minutes long. And then there's somebody kind of doing a deep dive with like one specific area. So one episode it might just be talking about the V-box and then you put the V model of the SVG. And then other episodes we talk about animation or there's, I kind of feel like this presentation is largely focused on animation, but I did the presentation on the Svg group that was like more overall encompassing, whatever. And there's definitely a lot of places for us to do.
The influences of real time SVG is listen to like a PDF that you've seen it. You'll search listen to like a PDF. What it is, it's an open source project where using WebSockets, they're trying to integrate with API. Whenever something's been edited, they, based on the size of the edit, they dynamically create an SVG element and then they create a sound. So what you're seeing is Wikipedia being edited in real time, and these are just simple SVG animations, and it's like a WebSocket that's pulling information. So you open up the dev tools.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and actually, I think yeah, I think they're doing. Actually, I think they're using V3, which I don't think is overkill. But this was, I think it was built like almost 2 years ago. But
That's crazy.
But this is real-time SVGs. This is just an example of.
And you can see each of these get added.
Why don't those speakers work?
Let me see. Are they always be?
No, that's just that speaker working.
Well, you can kind of see each of these. This guy find it out the end. You can hide ones and just like
Yeah, it's really simple. They might be using V3 for something else. But I remember inspecting this and like trying to do like this is. Like, wow,
I could go to sleep to this.
using V3. I don't know how it is. I'm using it with the sound. None of you guys saw the same.
Yeah, it's actually kind of old. I think if you look at their GitHub, it's the project started, I think in 2012.
Yeah, this is really cool. I forget what the presentation is. This is Google. Like a stupid.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. More stupider.
Oh, that's even better.
Just a cool thing I want to share. If you haven't seen this species and pieces stuff. Species and pieces. Oh, this is awesome. This doesn't use SVG, although it probably would benefit from using SVG, but it uses uses clip path, which follows the same formatting for the shapes that it clips. So you can use basically the same, if you copied a polygon from SVG, threw it into a CSS clip path, it would render the same shape. So this thing is awesome. There's an article on Smashing Magazine where going through, and essentially each of these animals is created using like 30 shapes, 30 divs. And they basically they tune them and train them. But it's like the process for getting this done is like amazing. And the guy who did it like really implemented, he wrote a small JavaScript, so like a script to help them actually draw things out on like in the DOM, so that way you could then it would like alert the app that you just drew, like any for each of these shapes 3 times, right? All at once. And the reason why I did 3 times specifically with volume is that you can literally just do 1, 2, and 3, and then spit out the coordinates on that SVG page. Not SVG, sorry, on the in the div. Sorry,
Yeah, I was reading that and like, thinking about this and done that. That's really cool. Yeah, but they did it in Illustrator, but they opened it in Illustrator and clicked it out.
where he had it just loaded in like a flat image with like CPU opacity and basically wherever you clicked in the div, it generate the platform EPS to it. Those are just the cool projects that are usually been done.
It has a really deep meaning about those species that are about to be they're in big fish. And it's the like raising it.
Cool, that's right. That's my favorite.